growth requires more than capital.
Why do we call it the cheat code? Nobody said growth had to be fair.
Revenue solves everything.
Welcome to the cheat code. What was our fastest path to revenue?
We tend to like to do things the hard way.
What's the cheat code? It's giving yourself an unfair advantage over the others.
What is it that really works, and how are we going to grow these organizations?
That's our cheat code.
Hey, hello. Welcome again. We got a twofer this week, although obviously we won't roll them out in that succession, but I feel like all we've done is podcast this week. Josh, great to see you again.
Hey, nice to see you. Max, welcome.
Yeah, well, now you're stealing my intro.
Oh, shit.
Great guest. Oh, shit. Great guest this week. Someone that I've known in SaaS for many years. He's always up to something. He's up to multiple things. Even right now, he's an advisor. He's an entrepreneur. Definitely kind of the ultimate growth hacker, in my opinion. And currently the GP over at GTMfund, venture capital firm, combining that old thing that we like to call operations, go-to-market operations with financial capital. Great idea. Wish I would have thought of it. And Max, and I always want to say your name is Altschuler because it's James Altschuler. Max Altschuler, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Good to see you.
So Max, obviously we have a pretty singular focus here on the cheat code, which is in fact the cheat code. So, go-to-market partnerships, so critical, and you've done such a great job at them. I'm curious how you would frame your cheat code as it relates to partnerships.
Yeah, there's probably many different ways to put it. I think, for one thing, the main thing is, the number is the number. Revenue is the number. MQLs, SQLs, whatever, those are cool. But revenue is the number. At the end of the day, that's what matters. So it's all a team game to achieve. And then, you have your air cover, you have your tried and true methods, your strategies, your tactics, whatever. But then, I think where a lot of what we got the most juice out of at Outreach, at least, and what we tell, our portfolio companies or some of these hacks is all the skunks work stuff that you do on the margin, which is, the podcast play, the Dreamforce play, the social media takeovers, all these different things that you can do as a marketing team to get creative, innovative, and kind of zig where everybody else is zagging, so to speak. And, it's true about marketing. I mean, once it becomes a tactic or a strategy that gets spoken about and rehearsed and talked about on stage at a SaaStr conference, and then everybody's doing it, and then it no longer works, right? So you got to keep innovating constantly inside the organization. And it's every couple of months where it's maybe a new thing that works, and then you double down on that. And then you have to know this isn't going to work at some point. So what are we going to do next? Can't rely on it.
Yeah, I think, when you say everything is revenue, there's a really bad framing of that, which is not how you're approaching it, obviously. But partnership teams and founders, everyone across the organization gets so caught up in this notion and this very superficial aspect of sourced revenue. And that's not what you're talking about there. I love the framing of constant innovation. The revenue aspect is this has to yield results, right? And you guys have just done across multiple different organizations, done such a great job at keeping that in mind. And then, like you said, zigging where everyone else is zagging type of an aspect. So give us an example of, that kind of constant skunk works innovation, but also tying that back to revenue.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's a strong example of the partnership at play here, but at Outreach, one of the things we did was we created the sales engagement category. And we did that in tandem with a couple of our close competitors, but we wanted to make sure we were category king. And we were seen in everyone's eyes as when you thought of sales engagement, you thought of Outreach. And I took over as head of marketing in August of 2018. And Salesforce or Dreamforce was, I think, 6 weeks after that. And one of the first things we did is we actually went out and brokered a deal to get the salesengagement.com domain name. And then we launched the Sales Engagement podcast at the event, and at the same time launched the book at the event and on the podcast, which would be at everybody's seat in a physical copy published by Wiley 6 months later at our Unleash conference. So that was like a drumbeat of, category creation lightning strikes, for example. when we started the podcast, it was, again, a lot of this is run by marketing. We wanted our host to be our SVP of Global Sales, Mark Cosaglo. One, he's charismatic. He's a sales nerd, gets the topic, all that stuff. But two, one of the plays we used was if we were working a deal and it was a competitive deal, we wanted to get through to, the main contact, or we wanted to put our champion on a pedestal, we were able to put them on our podcast and give them distribution, put them on a pedestal and showcase their knowledge to the world and show them as a thought leader. And I think in sales, one of the things that is part of your job description is to become a hero maker, to take your champion and turn them into a hero internally, but also give them value outside of that for their own career. When you put somebody on a podcast and get them showcasing their knowledge, that's going to get them job opportunities, promotion opportunities, all these other things. That's getting their company exposure, which they appreciate, a lot of other things in that deal. And having Mark as the podcast host allowed us to get pretty crucial face time between that leader of their organization and our leader, and build a relationship. And it wouldn't just be the hour they spend on the podcast, but maybe there's a half-hour prep call. And this was super important to a lot of deals. And now all of a sudden, Mark and their higher up have a relationship. And sometimes it was the person we were working with directly. Sometimes it was their boss. Sometimes it was their boss's boss that we were able to get on this podcast and now build a direct relationship with our head of sales. And that was invaluable in a lot of deal cycles. So there was a Trojan horse to our whole, podcast method to madness there that worked in a lot of different ways, from category creation to aligning with sales, being a true partner, and getting them in on this to get this deal matriculating through the pipeline or getting us closer to winning a competitive deal.
Super important thing I just want to call out there, because we're sitting here in 2024 where it seems like this podcast play is fairly ubiquitous now at this point. But we're talking about, 2017, right?
18,
yeah, 18. So, this was not what it is today. You know what I mean? I feel like folks have copied that play over and over again.
You have to have some level of distribution to go alongside that. We did have the Sales Hacker podcast also, which was a media company that was acquired by Outreach, my media company. And one of the nice things about that is if you were going after a whale of a company, you couldn't probably get the CRO to come on the Sales Engagement podcast. It's this little podcast. But they would come on the Sales Hacker podcast, and then we would kind of run the same play. And we had a host of that, which was Sam Jacobs from Pavilion, which was great for both of our businesses. But we were still able to bring our folks onto the prep call. We were still able to provide a service of value for those individuals. So, for example, if we're in a deal with Snowflake and we want to get the CRO on a podcast, they're probably not going to do a bunch of these junior podcasts that are company run podcasts, but they'll come on. Chris will come on the Sales Hacker podcast because it has greater distribution, because some of our other guests were Dan Pink or Andy Duke or, some of these Chris Voss that are more celebrity status than, a director of sales development at a, 200 person company. Right. So we did have this extra tool in our tool belt, essentially.
The other thing I just want to call out, because we deal with it so often, is I'll say little organization, but less large organization, trying to go into a show like Dreamforce and stand out. And I feel like they just get stuck in running through the regular cogs that exactly, you know what I mean? And little things like putting books on physical seats and things of that nature. That's just such a great way that I feel like people just don't open their mind to what you could actually do with these forums, and just kind of get caught into the monotony.
The book, tying this all together around category creation, really worked from a sales and marketing side of the business, where, we wrote the book and now we had these physical copies of highly credible books because they were published by Wiley, which is the top business publisher, does all the, Business for Dummy books, does most of the books that we probably all read on business books. And we were able to send those to customers. We use a Sendoso or a Postal or one of those sending services where we can accompany it with a note. It was part of a sequence that we can queue up. If we had a meeting with somebody, immediately after the meeting, they got a book, or if there were maybe 3 books for their office. And now these books are in their office too. So I remember talking to Doug Landis, who was an advisor for SalesLoft, and he accompanied their CEO to a meeting in person. And this was maybe a couple months later. And our books were right there on the bookshelf on the entrance. And he was yeah, that kind of reaction. And it was great. I was like, I like that. But also it's nice. Like they're there. They're front and center. Maybe other reps are taking, maybe other people in the office are taking a look at that, reading that, getting knowledge from that. And it also comes back to us afterwards. Maybe that, we have shout outs in the book. They go to the podcast. It's all layered into, a funnel essentially. And if it's not the touch point that's going to get you to buy now, you're thinking about us, you're thinking about this topic. And if you buy our competitor, great. Sometimes that ends up being delayed ARR for us. Fantastic. For a year, you come to us later. Whatever it is, we want the category to grow. And it's the second best thing is not that they don't choose anyone. It's that they choose a competitor is fine. That'll eventually come back for us in a great way if they get turned on to the space in general.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of what you're calling category creation is brand building, right? And brand gets such a bad rap these days from a marketing go-to-market perspective. Like you said, everything's got to be MQLs and SQLs and metrics driven. But at the end of the day, the podcast, the book, the Dreamforce presence, all those things that were up-leveling the category and up-leveling outreach, how much easier was it for your sales rep to make an outbound call to someone when they had seen all those things, right? How much more likely were they to get that meeting, to get that person on the podcast? I mean, that's the undervalued part of branding that people just forget about that has so much impact.
Brand is like the brand for the company, and like category creation is like the brand for the job to be done.
Right.
And so they start thinking about like, I have to hit this outcome. How am I going to hit this outcome? Wait, now there's this workflow that I can use to automate all these things that'll achieve a greater outcome. That's great. And they learn all about those things. And then it's like, by the way, here are the companies that enable you to do that. And here's how they work. And then you get into like the feature or capability war or whatever it is. But as long as they're thinking about it, they're coming to that conclusion. Like you're getting them to cross that chasm, and you're expanding your TAM from like these sales nerds who were the first, maybe 200 customers of any one of these companies because they're just like, what's the next tool I can use to optimize performance? And then all of a sudden it's like eventually AT&T, Kimberly-Clark, all these big stodgy businesses that are like, wow, I'm starting to hear more and more about this, or we just bought a company and they use this product and they're achieving crazy results. Like, how do we jump the fence here? How does this roll out? How does this work? And there's a million other things that go into that, like governance and security and everything else that you have to do for these companies. But that's part of the big partnership between sales and marketing is even helping them jump the fence in those businesses through this. Here's the educational material. Here's our book. We wrote a book. It's published by Wiley. Like, we are the leader in this space. And it's way more important and super competitive.
Well, what's interesting is you did almost, what Marketo did a decade earlier in the marketing automation space is by creating this groundswell of you have to have marketing automation, then sales engagement. In your case, you're a laggard if you haven't bought one of these tools, right? Like, the sales cycle changes drastically from those early days of what the hell is sales engagement to, you don't have sales engagement? Who are you? You're doing it wrong. And I think that's a fundamental shift in the sales process.
Well, and then there's like embarrassment of riches, money's coming in, everybody knows the category, times are good, but sales and marketing need to partner because we have a bunch of really good competitors. I mean, I worked for Outreach. I would never have said it while I was working there, but like, SalesOff was a really great company. They were well run. Product was, worked. It was great. Sales and marketing, great. Like, they excelled in a lot of different areas. I mean, they sold the company for over $2 billion. So they must have done a bunch of things right. So, it's not just, okay, like, can we sell this thing? Can we market this thing? But like, can we compete? And so there was a lot of things that we had to do that were, how do we win competitive deals? How do we do that without, burning tons of cash? Like, I think in the ZERP era, everybody got so obsessed with like, okay, well, like, we'll just invite the person to like the Warriors game and buy a box, and then go to the San Francisco Giants game, and we'll send a bunch of really expensive stuff or do X, Y, and Z that was like super unsustainable or not scalable or just burning tons of cash. And that wasn't the answer either. And so you always had to get creative and figure out what other ways we can provide value for these companies. And in some cases, it's all right, like, we got to compete on product. We got to compete on showcasing and highlighting the things that our product does that their product doesn't do. And, that's a marketing exercise. And in other cases, it's like, all right, well, Salesoft just drove like an acai food truck to their office and parked it out front and gave all their managers AirPods. We got to compete, and that's like a real story, by the way. And we got to compete against that. So in some ways, yeah, sometimes people buy the business, and if that works for them, great. Sometimes it doesn't work, and it's just expensive.
So I'm curious, and this is something that I think, we get to see play out with the acquisition of Sales Hacker by Outreach. How do you keep, which I'm kind of laying the question out here, but like, how do you keep that spirit alive, that like scrappy, hey, we don't have $1 million to throw at this campaign, because perceptively as an outsider in that transaction, it seems like you guys did that really well, because obviously Sales Hacker was, the more of a, in my view, more of a scrappy startup, gets brought in. Obviously Outreach is still a growing organization, but like by a much larger organization, and that often is the kiss of death right there. So how did you guys keep that spirit of innovation alive?
It was in my DNA. And so as like now the person running marketing for this company, that was, immediately how we did things. It's funny, when I joined, they had re-upped on the same venue for Unleash, which is our big customer conference. The previous year, they had 600 people there. The event cost, I think it was like 1.3 million was like the actual, like how much they were out of pocket on it. And they had a handful of sponsors. And so it was an outreach conference, and, there were a couple sponsors who sold to the same people. We took it over, and we couldn't let the budget go out of, bloat like that. At the same time, we were like, no, we're creating a category now. It can't just be an outreach conference. It has to be a category conference. So we sold a ton of sponsorships. We had an expo hall. We had like a sponsor stage. And I think our costs for the event actually went up by about $300K, because I cut all the things that weren't necessary. Like the first year they did handed out Mai Tais when you exited the main conference hall. And it's like, all right, I'll cut that 50 grand. Like that's a ridiculous amount of, like, that's what it is. You have staff standing there with there's a bunch of things you can cut easily. But we ended up spending it ended up costing us $500K, not 1.3 million. And we doubled the audience. And we were able to again, like in a scrappy way, do a bigger event, highlight us as the center of the universe in sales tech for a lot of what was happening at that time. Funny had this exercise where we wanted to announce this product maybe 6 weeks before Unleash. We realized it wasn't going to be ready yet, and we couldn't announce it. So we were scrambling to figure out what we were going to do. So we took one engineer, and we built all these integrations into Vidyard, Sendoso, Intercom, Drift, a couple other companies. And we made this whole thing around Outreach Galaxy, how like one single pane of glass, any action. Now you can put all these things into your sequences. And it was just this guy, Ted, one of our engineers, for 6 weeks, and Stephen Farnsworth grinding on that. And then we built a page for it, and like just reskinned our app directory. And that was like this whole thing. And it won a bunch of deals for us, because everybody was like, well, how does this integrate into Vidyard? Outreach says like it's all part of one single pane of glass now. And everybody else had to go and like figure out how to catch up on that. And it didn't take them long. It was probably like 2 months to figure out how to do that. But for those 2 months, we were ripping in deals because we had this great story and we made a bunch of noise at this event. So again, like marketing exercise, but it was all scrappy. It was figuring out, okay, like, limited resources. What can we do with limited time that's going to make the biggest impact? And some of it was, just my DNA. Some of it was experiences that I had, like running conferences, things like that. But you got to kind of figure that out. You got to keep the scrappiness to it. It's part.
Well, I love that, because you're also activating, you talk about leveraging tech and integration partners on the go-to-market front. Like now, every single one of those organizations, I'm sure, had a presence, if not sponsored the conference, right? Like what great exposure there. And then you've got, you've quadrupled your sales force, because, you literally got folks that are selling integrated technology.
Yeah. And they're pushing us too. I mean, like, hey, our integration's deeper with Outreach. You're going to get more out of it. And we're pushing them. We're in sales cycles, and our customers were coming to us once we did those integrations, and they were like, hey, I'm kind of maxed out on my Outreach licenses, but this Vidyard integration intrigues me because our reps want to start using video. So we'll go with Vidyard because they're the one who integrated here. So those companies liked it too. And then It strengthened the relationship between us. And I don't think like any of those companies ever pick sides because they wanted to get business from both. But I think all things were equal for that period of time, it would be outreach because we had this, somewhat deeper integration where it was all part of one single pane of glass and you never had to leave our application. And that's what we wanted. We were like, we don't want you to have to leave our application if you want to use all these other partners. So, but it's funny that that wouldn't have been on the roadmap for a while. That had it's not something we would have made a big deal out of. We just got in this pickle where we were like, all right, we got to announce something. And, we're talking about category creation. Like what's it going to be? Oh, well, everything revolves around us. We're the center of the universe. This is the outreach galaxy. And, one single pane of glass, any action.
How did that almost like unintentional partner ecosystem you created? I know there was intentionality to it, but like, how did that trickle down into the field? Did the sellers rally around that? What did you see from a field standpoint? How did those partnerships materialize? Well,
so first thing, like when you can make some noise and something feels like materially differentiated and like the sales team gets it, that's exciting for them. Like that gets them going. Like they get really excited. When you're announcing like enterprise features and functionality, like that doesn't really get them excited. They know that's going to help them close bigger deals, which is, a small subset of the team. But like announcing governance and, SOC 2 compliance or like a recent pen test or something like that isn't really going to move the needle with them. So, and then being able to then go to some of these companies, because like a big motion for us was like, all right, we know this company is a Terminus customer, but they're not using SalesLoft or Outreach yet, and they're in the market. How do we go get the rep from Terminus to help us break the account? They know the entire account. They know the plan. They know who we have to talk to, who's the budget holder, who's the signer, et cetera, et cetera. They know the right things to say. How do we get them to help us crack open this nut? So when we were, and we always run this play, when we have these deep integrations with folks, anytime there's a new integration, that's the first thing that we do. All right, let's talk about our different customers. Who can you help us tap into? Who can we help you tap into? We'll connect the reps on those things and then go. And for a long time, like our competitors were very well defined. It was sales engagement. It was sequences, dialing, that kind of stuff. So it was like SalesLoft, Groove, Inside Sales, whatever it was. And then as these companies started to, platformatize a little bit more, then, it's Gong, then, it's other companies that are in there. But you always have these partners. You have the whole sales enablement space, which is Seismic and HighSpot, Chopin, got, all the sending companies, et cetera, et cetera. So it was a great play, for our reps, and we help a lot with that. And then the other thing that we did was we were really good about kind of tapping into, the networks that like a lot of the executives had and a lot of our board and VCs had. So Scott Barker's role, he was like my number 2 at Sales Hacker, did partnerships. He moved over and led strategic engagement for outreach. And the strategic engagement remit was basically like, okay, well, let's cherry pick who's in our networks and figure out how to go to our target, like how to get them into our target accounts. So he would go and have a meeting maybe every other week with our board members or our VCs and look through their portfolios and say, oh, okay, like Meritech is an investor in us and HashiCorp. They should help us get into the CEO at HashiCorp. Can they broker a meeting between Manny and the CEO so they can do executive alignment play and, et cetera, et cetera. So we did a lot of that. We used Excel spreadsheets. And
I was just going to ask, like, it sounds like you guys are just kind of tackling that the old fashioned way, which I think so many organizations let to become a blocker. We don't have, XYZ tool. And like, yeah, those are nice. And certainly like if you've got the buy-in and the budget, like get them, put them in place. But like, there's so many resources that people just overlook.
With like Zapier and GPT and a couple of these other things now, you can probably string this together with one person. And I actually think we're going in the direction where there's going to be like one AI-enabled growth operator, and they just run all of these plays for the organization. You're going to need a much smaller marketing team and a much smaller sales development team. Like this will take care of all pipeline, and then humans are still needed to accelerate the deal. But that's a story for another time. But we had a virtual assistant. So one of my big unlocks running Sales Hacker, And even before that, when I was at Udemy, we had a virtual assistant team through a company called TaskUs, which is a phenomenal group to get to do BPO at large scale. But they were just starting out. We were just starting out. I had this amazing virtual assistant, and I left Udemy. She stayed, and then I was out to beers with a bunch of my like Udemy alum, and one of them dropped it that like Joanne was leaving, and so I said, "Oh, I gotta get her." And in the Philippines, they Facebook you, they friend you on Facebook, like all like, even if you're not friends or anything like that. So under the everybody at the table is like, "Oh, I'm gonna get her. I'm gonna get her." Under the table, I go on my Facebook and I type in like, "Hey, I heard you're leaving Udemy. Like, what are you doing next?" She's like, "Oh, I don't know yet. Looking for some contract work." I was like, "You start on Monday. I'll pay you whatever you want." And so by like, I don't know, the next 20 minutes, I look up from the table. I'm like, "Hey, I just hired her. Like, sorry guys." It was great. So she came in and built a team, and then at Sales Hacker, and we had her at Outreach also. And so anytime we needed anything enriched, she took a lot of the grunt work out of it. So for us, it's like, okay, here's these detailed directions, go do it. I want you to go on Crunchbase or the Meritech portfolio page on their website, go make an Excel spreadsheet of every company that's in there, then go into our target accounts, map the two, figure out who we're connected to, figure out who we can make the ask for based on this certain criteria. And then she'd map that out. And then all Scott would have to do is go in and literally use our own software Outreach to tee up, an email from one person to another person to set up this introduction for us. And now there's stuff like Cabal, Cabal, does some of this for you. But yeah, we kind of had to do it manually at the time. And it's the same thing with Outreach. I mean, when I was at Udemy, I did the same thing. I used ToutApp, which didn't have sequences. I had a Google Doc with if-then statements and a team of virtual assistants. And so I would have ToutApp send the first email. And if I got a response that wasn't, "Hey, let's set up a meeting," my virtual assistant would go in and copy and paste the right response, send it back until a meeting was set up and my calendar was populated. And I did sequences before sequences existed. And then Sales built sequences. So.
And those VAs are insanely affordable, right?
Yeah, $4 an hour for like the junior ones, and then like the big time ones, I think are 10, something like that.
Yeah, but all the brain power comes into just putting together that workflow, as you mentioned. Like, detail this out. Like, this is what I wish I had insight into. And there's just so much public domain data out there these days that it's there for the taking.
The Abraham Lincoln axe analogy is if I were given 6 hours to chop down a tree, I'd spend 5 hours sharpening the axe. It's like, I think all people do is just pick up axes and chop. They don't sit and think about things. And if you just actually spend more time sitting and thinking about things first and like building a strategy, building out, okay, here's how we're going to go execute on this, you're wildly more successful than just, all right, let's just jump into this thing. And I don't know, this is a whole other bucket, but I don't think people want to work anymore. So it's hard work. It's hard work to do this. Like, all these best ideas and the execution comes after the kids go to sleep. And I'm sitting in this office and I'm thinking through things, and like I live and breathe what I do. That's why I'm good at it.
And so that really kind of breeds my next question, which is, there's only so many hours in the day. And, we're talking about being scrappy. We're talking about like doing the hard things. We're talking about like constantly innovating, but you have to build teams around this as well. Like, what do you look for in folks? Because I love that hiring story. Like, what do you look for in individuals that are going to work, closely with you or on your team in order to ensure that perpetuates?
High agency can
How do you find out if someone has agency? Like,
well, yeah,
tactical.
You can kind of see in the hiring process often how responsive they are, how badly they want to work for you, what kind of, whether you give them
they come prepared with,
project.
Hey, this is what I'm seeing in your organization, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, totally.
Exactly. And like we, early on in the business, like we do homework assignments, we do projects and stuff like that. We still do it for the fun. Now, I mean, that maybe phases out to a degree at a certain point. I think like eventually also like executives that are less of a homework assignment, more of like a kind of a 30, 60, 90 or something like that, like a presentation. But we definitely want to see that there's also that like quality of thought that goes into things. Like, is there a unique thought process here, or is there an experience or wise thought process that goes into this? Whether it's a homework assignment or just a conversation that we're having or an approach to the problem. What are some other things that we look for? It's different now hiring for the fund slightly than it was, back in the day, but we did just make a VP of marketing hire, and attention to detail, passion for the job, knowing that somebody's going to be on kind of and like live and breathe this. I mean, that's what we want.
Yeah. Are they investing in, becoming better? And like, so many people like, hey, where do you go to, keep up on what's happening in the space? What other folks are doing, so on. And you just get that like blank stare back. And I do want to make one note, because I've seen so many 30-60-90s that are downloaded from like the standard HubSpot content. It's like, what should you do in the first 90 days of a marketing hire? Like, please stop downloading that shit. Like, it's very, very obvious. Like, I love the practical exercise approach to it. Like,
I don't care if it's a marketing manager role at a 2,000 person company or my fourth hire. They should both be like, the role that I'm hiring for is I want a lifer, someone who like really enjoys this and wants to do this and like is bought in on this, and we're their first choice to work for, and understands that if they give me their best years, I'm going to put them on a path to be incredibly successful after that. And I've had people, almost everybody work for me at Sales Hacker, who like before they worked for me, they had a much lesser job than the job that they got after they worked for me. And most occasions, it was 2-3 years that I got from them. And then it was like, I couldn't afford them anymore because they were getting so many opportunities. And it was kind of part of the business. Like, I exposed all of these people that worked for me at Sales Hacker to all of our SaaS companies that sponsored us, our attendees, our speakers, and they got to interact and interface with these individuals. And I knew the whole time that all of these people could poach them. They were all venture backed and I wasn't. They could spend way more on these people than I could. But I wanted to give them the exposure. I wanted to give them a huge amount of stuff to do for the business. And they rewarded me by working their asses off and doing great work. And if I lost them for that reason, I'm so happy for them. That is fantastic. And I'll go get somebody else and we'll run it back. And that's what I get. I pay them probably less, because we are not a venture-backed company, and I find diamonds in the rough. We work on them. They give me their best hours, and then they get a much better job after that. We all win. And I'm good with that. I'm fine with that. That's part of the plan. That is the plan.
Yeah, we used to call that tours of duty. Like, hey, I'm probably, I love the life mentality, but you're probably not going to work here for 10 years, right? Like, but if you give me like 3 to 4 super solid years, like, I can amplify your career path in a major way. So love that.
And I had multiple people. I mean, between the Sales Hacker and the outreach run, it was like a little over 9 years. So I had multiple people who gave me 5, 6, 7 years. And then I had others who gave me 2 fantastic years that really improved my business. And in exchange, they went from a salary before they started working with me, like $78K a year, to like $240. No joke. And that person was like, I think a year and a half to 2 years. I mean, exactly. They went from being a junior kind of specialist role in marketing to a VP at a decent sized company, working for me for, I think, a year and a half, 2 years, like somewhere in between that. Incredible.
Oh yeah, totally. It's totally incredible. Well, I think a couple of things that took away from me is, one, if you were really diligent about that lens of, do you have the passion? Am I your number one choice? That type of, like, cause you can feel that. If you really hire through that lens and stay diligent on it, you will make good hires like that. But it's hard to do, right? As you get bigger and you scale, but when someone like is into it, like, oh man, I really want to work at this company because I'm into Max or I'm into Justin, whatever it may be, like you know that. And I've seen that from the other side, right? Like the story you're telling about, people year after year coming in, like at LeadMD, we used to say, you spend a year with us, you're going to go get a job at any internal company you want, right? Like, because we created the best employees for anyone who was hiring marketing automation talent. Like we just flat out did. And then you had the few outliers, right? Like I'm one of them. I spent 9 years with Justin and now I'm, paying to make money. So, it's a whole different Yeah, exactly. Now I'm paying to work, but it's, I get it, right? What you're saying is real. It does happen out there.
Scott Barker. I was hiring a partnerships person for Sales Hacker. This was like during the amazing time of LinkedIn when the newsfeed just started, and I was posting getting this
when
crazy
it wasn't
impression.
filled with every AI bot in the world.
I remember Barker stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So I literally just posted a link to a Typeform. I was like, I'm hiring a partnerships person. I had 150 applications, like 30 of which were really good. Whittled that down to 16 to 8 to 4 to 2. And it was the last two, it was Scott versus Scott. Different Scott versus our Scott Barker. And the other Scott was actually had like what I wanted to hire. He came from like an enterprise sales role. I wanted to get Salesforce and Microsoft to pay me a lot of money for our events and stuff. Scott Barker didn't. He came from like a sales development role. He could build pipeline, great. He's charismatic, did other things really well for us. So I was on team other Scott, and my whole team was on team Scott Barker. And I was like, okay, I can't make the decision here. Like it was so kind of split. And so I get on a call with both of them at the end. It's like the last phone call. And I said to the other Scott, it's like, okay, why here? And he was like, I'm selling like, Autodesk type software. And I really want to get back into like sales and marketing, just selling to sales and marketing in general. Really like the space. Okay, cool. Scott Barker, why do you want to, I won't leave my job unless it's to come work with you right now at Sales Hacker. I was like, how could I not hire Scott Barker? Like it was an obvious choice at that point. And he came and he crushed it for us. And he's been with me for almost 8 years now. And, that's how it starts. You got to hire those hungry people that want this opportunity, this only. And it's important.
So critical. Well, Max, I think we've talked about, we started off with innovation and scrappy and doing these kind of stuntworks projects as it relates to partnerships, but I think we've run the entire gamut in terms of how to apply that across a business. So just great context, great insight. If folks want to, connect with you, figure out what's going on over at GTMfund, or just, regarding any of your ventures, where should they go?
Yeah, LinkedIn's the best way to reach me. If we're not already connected, or if we are already connected, send me a message. But Max Altschuler at LinkedIn, also Hack at Max on Twitter. You can follow everything on the GTMfund at gtmnow.com is our media entity with our podcast, our newsletter, gtmfund.com for everything fund related.
Yeah, great example of running the successful playbook. Run it back. It works.
Yeah, we bought it back.
Yeah, exactly. I guess that's also a good testament to how important founders are to conveying missions. So, Max, thanks so much for joining us here today. If you're joining on the listening side for the first time, please give us a like, a subscribe, give some feedback on the episode. Literally, why we do this is conveying good information. So hopefully we're doing so. And again, thank you to Max for joining, and we'll see you next time on The Cheat Code.